हेलो गाइस, वेलकम बैक टू द चैनल यूट्यूब डीमिस्टिफाइड। एंड चलिए कंटिन्यू करते हैं हमारे बीए फिलोसफी ऑनर्स के सेकेंड ईयर के कोर्स के साथ विद सेमेस्टर 3। तो सबसे पहले हम हमारे डिसिप्लिन वेस्टर्न फिलोसफी के साथ स्टार्ट कर रहे हैं, जिसमें हम लोग मेनली रैशनलिज्म एंड एम्पिरिसिज्म के ऊपर फोकस करेंगे। सो हमारा जो पहला यूनिट है उसमें हम रैशनलिज्म एंड एम्पिरिसिज्म का एक बेसिक इंट्रोडक्शन समझेंगे एंड उसके बीच की डिबेट समझेंगे कि व्हाट इज़ द डिफरेंस बिटवीन द टू। ओके, सो सबसे जनरल टर्म्स में अगर हम बात करें, नेशनलिज्म और एम्पिरिसिज्म के बीच का जो ये डिबेट और जो डिस्प्यूट चलता आ रहा है हैज़ बीन टेकन टू कंसर्न द एक्सटेंट टू विच वी आर डिपेंडेंट अपॉन एक्सपीरियंस इन आर एफर्ट टू गेन नॉलेज ऑफ द एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड। तो बेसिकली हम जो ये डिबेट कर रहे हैं नेशनलिज्म और रैशनलिज्म एंड एम्पिरिसिज्म के ऊपर, दैट इज़ द डिबेट अपॉन की विच इज़ द द वे जिससे हम नॉलेज गेन करते हैं, हमारे आसपास की चीज़ों को परसीव कर, मतलब चीज़ों के बारे में नॉलेज गेन करते हैं। आपको अगर याद होगा, सो दिस इज़ व्हाट वी हैव ऑलरेडी स्टडीड हमारे सेमेस्टर 2। हाँ, मतलब हमारे सेमेस्टर 2 फर्स्ट ईयर के सेमेस्टर 2 में हमने यही चीज़ जो है वो जो ग्रीक फ़िलोसोफर थे पार्मेनाइड्स, सो पार्मेनाइड्स के उसमें हमने यही चीज़ समझी थी, that how he wrote a poem upon the way of truth and the way of seeming or the way of knowing. Okay, that is the doxa and the truth. So basically ये उसी के ऊपर है। लाइक पार्मेनाइड्स आर्ग्यूड, वो जो हमने पढ़ा था गॉडेस एंड ऑल दैट, कि पार्मेनाइड्स ने आर्ग्यू करा था कि विच इज़ द बेस्ट वे और विच इज़ द करेक्ट वे ऑफ गेनिंग नॉलेज। उसमें हमने ऑब्जेक्ट्स ऑफ सेंस एंड ऑब्जेक्ट्स ऑफ रीज़न के बारे में पढ़ा था। तो पार्मेनाइड्स की वो पोएम जैसे हमने उसमें पढ़ा था, उसी तरीके से हम यहाँ पे नॉलेज गेन करने की बात कर रहे हैं। ओके, सो हम लोग एक्सपीरियंस को दो तरीके से देखते हैं। एक तो सेंस एक्सपीरियंस, ठीक है, और जिसमें और दूसरा है रिफ्लेक्टिव एक्सपीरियंस। अब हमारे सेंस एक्सपीरियंस में आते हैं हमारे 5 सेंसेस, आईज, नोज़, ईयर्स, टंग, स्किन, ये हमारे 5 सेंसेस। ओके, एंड रिफ्लेक्टिव एक्सपीरियंस में आता है हमारी कॉन्शियस अवेयरनेस, हमारी मेंटल ऑपरेशंस, हमारे माइंड और मेंटल लेवल पे जो ऑपरेशंस हो रहे हैं जिससे हम नॉलेज गेन कर रहे हैं। इन दोनों के बीच का जो डिस्टिंक्शन इज़ प्राइमरली इज़ ड्रॉन प्राइमरीली बाय रेफरेंस टू देयर ऑब्जेक्ट्स। ठीक है, यानी कि सेंस एक्सपीरियंस जो है वो हमारे एक्सटर्नल ऑब्जेक्ट्स को के बारे में नॉलेज गेन करने में, एक्वायर करने में हमारी हेल्प करता है, जबकि हमारे जो अवेयरनेस हमारे मेंटल ऑपरेशंस की है, दैट इज़ द नॉलेज ऑफ आवर माइंड्स। तो रैशनलिज्म एंड एम्पिरिसिज्म के डिस्प्यूट में दिस डिस्टिंक्शन इज़ ऑफन निगलेक्टेड, दैट रैशनलिज्म जो है वो बेसिकली नॉलेज ऑफ आवर माइंड्स के बारे में भी बात कर रहा है, नॉट ओनली द नॉलेज ऑफ एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड। एंड एम्पिरिसिज्म में हम लोग नॉलेज ऑफ एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड, एक्सटर्नल ऑब्जेक्ट्स के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं। Rationalist critiques of empiricism usually contend that the latter claims that all our ideas originate with sense experience. तो एम्पिरिसिस्ट जो होते हैं, एम्पिरिसिज्म एंड रैशनलिज्म का आपको मतलब पता ही है। रैशनल इज़ रीज़न, ओके, रैशनलिज्म के नाम से समझ आ रहा है ना। एम्पिरिसिज्म इज़ समथिंग, एम्पिरिसिज्म का मतलब होता है टू गेन समथिंग विद द हेल्प ऑफ आवर सेंसेस, आवर एक्सपीरियंस, दैट इज़ व्हाट इज़ एम्पिरिसिज्म इज़। ओके, जैसे हम जैसे कि रैशनलिज्म कैन ऑल्सो बी टर्म्ड एज ए प्रायरी, बट एम्पिरिसिज्म इज़ व्हाट इज़ गेन्ड थ्रू एक्सपीरियंस। तो एम्पिरिसिस्ट जो होते हैं वो कहते हैं कि हमारे जितने भी आइडियाज़ दैट ओरिजिनेट फ्रॉम within us, the thoughts, they all originate with sense experience. And how do they say this is कि हम जैसे बाहर की external objects को perceive करते हैं, उन्हें समझते हैं, and that is how our ideas originate. So our ideas are not independent of their own, they are connected or they are dependent on the external objects. हमें जो ideas आते हैं वो हमारे external objects के basis से हमें आते हैं, हमें उन external objects के बारे में पहले से पता चलता है रहता है और उसके बाद हमें वो ideas आते हैं. It is generally agreed that most rationalists claim that there are significant ways in which our concepts and knowledge are gained independently of sense experience. तो रैशनलिस्ट जो इनका कहना है कि हमारा नॉलेज जो है वो थ्रू रीज़न आता है, नॉलेज ऑफ आवर माइंड आता है, उनका कहना है कि हमारे नॉलेज जो है वो सेंस एक्सपीरियंस से हट के, यानी जो हम सेंसेस का यूज़ करके एक्सपीरियंस करते हैं उससे इंडिपेंडेंट होके हम लोग नॉलेज गेन करते हैं। एक रैशनलिस्ट का मतलब ये नहीं है कि हमारा नॉलेज इज़ एक्वायर्ड इंडिपेंडेंटली ऑफ एनी एक्सपीरियंस, सेंस एक्सपीरियंस, वो बिल्कुल ऐसा नहीं बोलते कि बिल्कुल भी सेंस एक्सपीरियंस की ज़रूरत नहीं है, बट एट इट्स कोर द कार्टेशियन कॉग्निटो depends on our reflective intuitive awareness of the existence of a current thought. Rationalists generally develop their view in two steps. ठीक है, rationalists कैसे दो steps में अपना view वो करते हैं. First, they argue that there are cases where the content of our concepts or knowledge outstrips the information that sense experience can provide. ओके, तो सबसे पहले रैशनलिस्ट का आर्ग्यूमेंट दो तरीके से क्या होता है कि द कॉन्सेप्ट्स ऑफ सॉरी द वे दैट देयर आर केसेस वेयर द कंटेंट ऑफ आवर कॉन्सेप्ट्स आउटस्ट्रिप्स द इंफॉर्मेशन दैट सेंस एक्सपीरियंस कैन प्रोवाइड. तो रैशनलिस्ट अपना पॉइंट रखने के लिए दो चीज़ें, दो आर्ग्यूमेंट्स हमें प्रोवाइड करते हैं. पहला कि कई बार हमें उन चीज़ों की भी नॉलेज होती है जो हमें सेंस एक्सपीरियंस से नहीं पता चलता है. सो दे से दैट व्हेन दैट इज़ इट, कि जब हमारी नॉलेज जो है, हमारे पास एक्स्ट्रा नॉलेज होती है अदर दैन दी सेंस एक्सपीरियंस, दैट इज़ अ प्रूफ कि हम सेंस एक्सपीरियंस के अलावा हमारी नॉलेज गेन करते हैं. एंड सेकेंड, दे कंस्ट्रक्ट अकाउंट्स ऑफ हाउ रीज़न इन सम फॉर्म और अदर प्रोवाइड्स दैट एडिशनल इन्फॉर्मेशन अबाउट द एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड. कि जो हमारा रीज़न है, जो हमारा रैशनल है, वो हमें इस एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड के बारे में इंफॉर्मेशन देता है जो इन्फॉर्मेशन हमें सेंस एक्सपीरियंस से नहीं मिलता है. Most empiricists present complementary lines of thought. First, they develop accounts of how experience alone, sense experience, reflective experience, or a combination of the two, provides the information that rationalists cite insofar as we have it in the first place. तो अब यहाँ पे एम्पिरिस्ट जो है वो कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री लाइन्स ऑफ थॉट कैसे, कॉम्प्लीमेंट्री इज असिस्टिंग द अदर वन. ठीक है, तो दे डेवलप अकाउंट्स ऑफ आर एक्सपीरियंस अलोन, चाहे वो सेंस एक्सपीरियंस हो, चाहे वो रिफ्लेक्टिव एक्सपीरियंस हो, दोनों का कॉम्बिनेशन हो, दोनों इंडिपेंडेंटली वर्क करे. ये सबसे पहले हमें वो इन्फॉर्मेशन प्रोवाइड करते हैं जो रैशनलिस्ट कहते हैं कि हमें हमारे इनर उससे और रीज़न के थ्रू मिलते हैं. सेकेंड, एम्पिरिसिस्ट अटैक द रैशनलिस्ट अकाउंट ऑफ हाउ रीज़न इज़ अ प्राइमरी सोर्स ऑफ concepts or knowledge. They show that reflective understanding can and usually does supply some of the missing links. तो empiricist का कहना है कि ओके, rationalists source and mode के थ्रू नॉलेज का गेन बता रहे हैं दैट कैन फिल द लिटिल गैप्स एंड हमारे गैप्स को फुलफिल कर सकता है, बट दैट डज नॉट इंटायरली मीन कि what rationalism state is the only way of gaining knowledge. The distinction between rationalism and empiricism is not without problems. One of the main issues is that almost no author falls neatly into one camp or another. ये चीज़ हम आगे देखेंगे कि हम जितने भी rationalist and empiricist philosophers पढ़ेंगे, चाहे वो लेबनीज हो, कांट हो, डिस्कार्ट्स हो, ये जो हम और भी आगे जो हम वेस्टर्न फिलोसफर्स का थॉट पढ़ेंगे और रैशनलिज्म एंड एम्पिरिसिज्म, उसमें हम देखेंगे कि उनके प्राइमरी सोर्स ऑफ नॉलेज वो रैशनलिज्म या एम्पिरिसिज्म के थ्रू बताते हैं, बट देन अगेन दे सपोर्ट द अदर. तो वो दूसरे वाले को कम्प्लीटली निगलेक्ट नहीं करते हैं. सो देर इज़ वन प्रॉब्लम कि हम किसी भी फ़िलोसोफर को नहीं बोल सकते दैट फ़िलोसोफर इज़ 100% नेशनलिस्ट और 100% एम्पिरिसिस्ट. ये चीज़ हम ज़रूर देखेंगे. ओके, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, जैसे यहीं पर एग्जाम्पल दिया हुआ है, डिस्कार्ट्स फॉर इंस्टेंस, हु इज़ कॉमनली रिगार्डेड एज अ रिप्रेजेंटेटिव रैशनलिस्ट, जो कि बहुत ही डिस्कार्ट्स जो है वो बहुत ही प्राइमरीली एक रैशनलिस्ट जाना जाता है, हैड क्लियर एम्पिरिसिस्ट लीनिंग्स. Okay, where he said that yes, sense experience plays a crucial role. तो यहाँ पे हम देखने को मिलते हैं कि डिस्कार्ट्स, जो कि बहुत ही एक वेल नोन रैशनलिस्ट है, had empiricist leanings, that he is not completely neglecting empiricist learnings and gaining of knowledge. Similarly, Locke, who is thought to be a paradigmatic empiricist, argued that reason is on equal footing with experience. तो उन्होंने भी आर्ग्यू करा है कि रीज़न इज़ ऑल्सो इम्पॉर्टेंट व्हेन इट कम्स टू द नॉलेज ऑफ सर्टन थिंग्स, मोस्ट फेमसली ऑफ मॉरल ट्रूथ्स. In what follows, we clarify what this distinction has traditionally been taken to apply to, as well as point out its by now widely recognized shortcomings. So हम लोग अब देखेंगे इनके बीच में पूरा so this is our table of contents. Rationalism, empiricism की सबसे पहले हम deep study करेंगे, कुछ हम इनके thesis पढ़ेंगे, what those theses are stating. जैसे हाँ यहाँ पर आप देख सकते हैं the deduction thesis, innate knowledge thesis, innate concept thesis, and ये काफ़ी simple and easy thesis है, as the name suggests. Okay, so these four things are what we are going to read and study. The dispute between rationalism and empiricism takes place primarily with epistemology, the branch of philosophy devoted to studying the nature, sources, and limits of knowledge. So, अभी तक आप लोगों ने, as we have already completed a semester 1 and semester 2 of philosophy, and if you're continuing with the third semester, if you're new to this video, then of course that's a different thing. But if you have, after in continuation with both these semester, you're continuing with the third semester now on my channel, तो आपको पता ही होगा कि metaphysics and epistemology क्या है. Metaphysics is the inquiry into the nature of being, existence, universe, all of these things, and epistemology is of knowledge. Okay, so knowledge itself can be of many different things and is usually divided among three main categories. Okay, so knowledge को हम कैसे तीन categories में कहते हैं? External world, internal world, and aesthetical values. So knowledge of the external world, जिससे हम बहुत easily हम समझ रहे हैं कि what are all the external worlds, आपके आगे जो table, chair, fan, all of these things around you, books, and all of these things around you, this is what is, knowledge of the external world. Knowledge of the internal world, or the self knowledge, is the knowledge of yourself, and then the knowledge of moral values. We may find that there are category specific conditions that must be satisfied for knowledge to occur, and that it is easier or more difficult to shape certain questions and answers, depending on whether we focus on the external world or the values. However, some of the defining questions of general epistemology include the following. So epistemological related to general questions, any knowledge related to general questions are: what is the nature of propositional knowledge? Knowledge that a particular proposition about the world itself, morality, or beauty is true. Propositions, as far as I remember, we have already studied, if I'm not wrong, in semester 1. Okay, the propositions in Aristotelian, Boolean propositions. So this is semester 1 ke logic mein we have already covered that. So propositional knowledge is that how a statement gives us the information about any objects and how much that statement is true. So we have dealt with the validity of that proposition, the truth of that proposition, the sound of that proposition, all of these things. So, and how can we gain knowledge? So one of them is that what the propositional knowledge that we have about something, how much is that true? Then how can we gain knowledge? What are the limits of our knowledge? So let's discuss these three questions first. To know a proposition, we must believe it and it must be true, but something more is required, something that distinguishes knowledge from a lucky guess. So there has to be something that is just not a lucky guess. Knowledge cannot just be a lucky guess. There has to be a concrete proof for that. So this additional element is called warrant, and throughout the text we are going to use this warrant. So this warrant, जैसे कि हम warranty card लेते हैं किसी भी चीज़ का, something has a warranty or a guarantee card. Similarly, let's take this additional element जो कि उसका proof है that this is just not a random lucky or guess, that it is a concrete thing that we are talking about. The proposition, whatever the proposition is talking about, is true. So that additional element जो कि एक truth, मतलब एक guess को actually में truth बना रहा है, let's call that warrant. And throughout the text हम लोग warrant को refer करने वाले. So don't forget this, that additional element that makes a lucky guess into a truthful proposition. A good deal of philosophical work has been invested in trying to determine the nature of warrant, that what is this warrant जो कि इस lucky guess को actual में knowledge में convert करता है. How can we gain knowledge? So we can form true beliefs just by making lucky guesses. How to gain warranted beliefs is less clear. Okay, कि कैसे warranted beliefs, that means the concrete true belief, that not just any lucky guess, random हमने guess कर लिया कि this is this and that we have accepted it. Warranted belief is what is true, and then there is a proof of that truth, that yes, there is an evidence that whatever we know through that proposition is true. Moreover, to know the external world or anything about beauty, for instance, we must be able to think that about the external world or about beauty, and it is unclear how we gain the concepts we use in thought, or what assurance, if any, we have that the ways in which we divide up the world using our concepts correspond to divisions that actually exist. So, how do we do this? How do we make these, categories? How do we invest in these concepts of beauty or morality or ethics, all of these things? Then what are the limits of our knowledge? Some aspects of the external world ourselves or the moral and aesthetical values maybe within the limits of our thought, but beyond the limits of our knowledge. सो कुछ एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड के ऑब्जेक्ट्स जो है दे मे बी विद इन द लिमिट्स ऑफ अर थॉट, but the limits of our knowledge, we can think about them, we can discuss about them, but we cannot gain knowledge about them, and knowledge about something is the true thing about it. So we can include them in our thoughts, but gaining knowledge of them is difficult. Faced with competing descriptions of them, we cannot know which description is true. Some aspects of the external world or ourselves or the moral and aesthetical values may even be beyond the limits of our thought, so that we cannot form intelligible descriptions of them, let alone know that a particular description is true. तो कई बार हम कुछ चीज़ों को तो हमारी डिस्क्रिप्शन एंड थॉट में इंक्लूड कर लेते हैं, लेकिन उसकी नॉलेज गेन नहीं कर पाते हैं, बट समटाइम्स तो दैट थिंग इज़ इवन बियॉन्ड आवर थॉट. So how do we go about them, describing them? The disagreement between rationalism and empiricism primarily concerns the second question. That is, how do we gain knowledge? Rationalists say that we gain knowledge through reason, and empiricists say that we gain knowledge through sense experience. So हमने अभी तक जो तीन questions discuss करे, they were the three epistemological questions. Now we're talking in rationalism and empiricism, we're talking about the second one, focusing on that. How do we gain knowledge? What is the source of whatever knowledge we have? In some instances, the disagreement on this topic results in conflicting responses to the other questions as well. The disagreement makes tend to incorporate the nature of warrant. तो ये disagreement जो है वो कई बार warrant का nature, that is that extra additional element जो कि guess को truth में and knowledge में convert कर रहा है, that warrant का nature कैसा है, what is that extra thing? Our focus here will be on the competing rationalist and empiricist responses to the second question. There are three main theses that are usually seen as relevant for drawing the distinction. While the first thesis has been traditionally seen as distinguishing between rationalism and empiricism, scholars now mostly agree that most rationalists and empiricists abide by the so-called intuition deduction thesis concerning the ways in which we become warranted in believing propositions in a particular subject area. तो किसी भी प्रोपोजिशन को नॉलेज में कन्वर्ट करने के लिए जो वारंट हम लोग लेते हैं, सो मोस्ट रैशनलिस्ट एंड एम्पिरिसिस्ट अबाइड बाय द इंट्यूशन डिडक्शन थीसिस. हम आगे देखेंगे what is this thesis. So this thesis, some propositions in a particular subject area S are knowable by us by intuition alone. Still others are knowable by being deduced from intuited propositions. So intuition is in the form of direct, immediate insight. Intuition has been likened to a sort of internal perception by most rationalists and empiricists alike. Intellectually grasping a proposition, we just see it to be true in such a way as to form a true warranted belief in it. Deduction is a process in which we derive conclusions from intuited premises through valid arguments, once in which the conclusion must be true if the premises are true. So we intuit that the number 3 is prime and that is it is greater than 2. We then deduce from this knowledge that there is a prime number greater than 2. So intuition and deduction provide us with knowledge that is independent for its justification of experience. This type of knowledge, since Kant, is commonly called a priori. So a priori के बारे में, if I am not wrong, we have already discussed about how Kant describes time to be not a priori. ओके, सो इंट्यूशन डिडक्शन थीसिस जो है वो नॉलेज के बारे में एक सिग्निफिकेंट चीज़ हमें एक्सप्लेन कर रहा है। मतलब अकॉर्डिंग टू दिस थीसिस, इंट्यूशन का मतलब दैट वी नो इट, we just know it within ourselves. Nobody has told it. We have not seen, heard, or known it from anywhere else, but we just know it from within us. That it was mixed with our intuition. We just know it that okay, this is the case. Okay, then we have deduction. Deduction is when कि जब हम लोग उस intuition का use करके deduce करते हैं whether the hypothesis that we have or the question that we have thought of is correct or not. ठीक है, जैसे यहाँ पर example दिया है कि we have an intuition that 3 is a prime number. That is an intuition that okay 3 is just a prime number. अब हम उसको deduce करेंगे through various premises, and जब premises true होते then the conclusions also true. And again if I'm not wrong, we have studied this in logic semester 1, the deduction thing. Okay, induction and deduction. We can generate different versions of the intuition deduction thesis by substituting different subject areas for the variable s. Several rationalists and empiricists take mathematics to be knowable by intuition and deduction. Some place ethical truths in this category. तो हम लोग इंट्यूशन और डिडक्शन में एस जो बोल रहे हैं वो बेसिकली अलग अलग सब्जेक्ट्स के बारे में बात करें। बहुत सारे सब्जेक्ट्स हो सकते हैं जो इन दो कैटेगरीज, आई मीन इन दो थीसिस के हिसाब से, जैसे कि मैथमेटिशियंस क्लेम दैट दे नो इट बाय इंट्यूशन एंड डिडक्शन, दैट सम थिंग्स आर दोज दैट दे हैव नोन दैट ओके दिस इज ट्रू, एंड अदर थिंग्स दैट डिड्यूस फ्रॉम these intuited premises. And like some include metaphysical claims such as God exists, we have free will, our mind and body are distinct substances. So these are some examples of the different areas जिसमें हम लोग intuition and deduction का use करते हैं. Second thesis is distinction between rationalism and empiricism is innate knowledge thesis. Now this is that we have knowledge of some truths in a particular subject area as part of our nature. So the innate knowledge thesis asserts that the existence of knowledge whose source is our own nature. We are born with this knowledge. So we already are born with this knowledge innate. It has already been with us. Part of our body, जैसे कि the eyes, nose, ears, hands, these are the parts of our body. Similarly, that knowledge is also a part of our body. It doesn't depend for its justification on our accessing it via particular experiences. That the knowledge, we are born with it, and we don't need other than that any reason or experience for that for us to know that knowledge. It is just part of our nature. Experiences may trigger a process by which we sorry, a process by which we bring this knowledge to consciousness, but these experiences do not trigger us. तो experiences क्या करते हैं कि whatever experience we gain from our senses वो हमारे अंदर की knowledge को trigger करते हैं, that we know about them, but we are already born with all that knowledge. It is a part of our nature embedded with our body. But these experiences do not provide us with the knowledge itself. It has been with us all way long. According to some rationalists, we gain the knowledge in an earlier existence. So according to others, God provides us with it creation, and some play the part of our nature through natural selection. तो कुछ rationalists हैं उनके हिसाब से that it is the God that who have provided us, or some believe that in an earlier existence we have gained that knowledge and that we are born with it. We get different versions of the innate knowledge thesis by substituting different subject areas for the variable s. The more subjects included within the range of the thesis, or more controversial the claim to have knowledge in them, the more radical the form of rationalism. Stronger and weaker understandings of warrant yield stronger and weaker versions of the thesis as well. Empiricists reject this thesis. So rationalists इस thesis के साथ agree करते हैं that but the empiricists reject that this thesis is not true. Locke, for instance, dedicates the whole first book of the essay to show that such knowledge, even if it existed, would be of little use to us. So Locke जो है वो पूरी अपनी book का first part मतलब पूरा होल फर्स्ट बुक ऑफ द एसे हमें यही शो करते हैं कि अगर ओके मान भी लो कि हमारी कोई ऐसी इनेट नॉलेज होती then it would have been of no use to us. The third important thesis that is relevant to the distinction is the innate concept thesis. Okay, so we have some of the concepts we employ in a particular subject area as part of our rational nature. So आप समझ रहे हैं कि the intuition deduction thesis, the innate knowledge thesis, and the innate concept thesis. Okay, these are so closely related to each other. According to the innate concept thesis, some of our concepts are not gained from experience. They are part of our rational nature in such a way that while sense experiences may trigger a process by which they are brought to consciousness, experience does not provide the concepts or determine the information they contain. Some claim that the innate concept thesis is entailed by the innate knowledge thesis. A particular instance of knowledge can only be innate if the concepts that are contained in the known proposition are also innate. सो इनेट कॉन्सेप्ट थीसिस जो है वो भी इनेट नॉलेज थीसिस का ही एक हम मतलब वी कैन से दैट दे आर सिमिलर. Locke's position is that a particular instance of knowledge can only be innate if the concepts that are contained in the known proposition are also innate. कि जो कॉन्सेप्ट्स की हम जिसकी बात कर रहे हैं, जैसे कि इनेट नॉलेज थीसिस में जो बात हो रही है कि वी ऑलरेडी नो अबाउट ऑल ऑफ दीज थिंग्स, इट इज़ विद आर नेचर. इनेट कॉन्सेप्ट थीसिस में कि नॉलेज का कॉन्सेप्ट भी, जैसे कि मोरालिटी, एथिक्स, ऑल ऑफ दीज डिफरेंट कॉन्सेप्ट्स, ब्यूटी, ऑल ऑफ दीज आर ऑल्सो known from within. So others such as Caruthers argue against this connection. The content and strength of the innate concept thesis varies with the concepts claimed to be innate. The more a concept seems removed from experience in the mental operations we can perform on experience, the more plausibly it may be claimed to be innate. So since we do not experience perfect triangles but do experience planes, our concept of the former is a more promising candidate for being innate than our concept of the latter. तो क्योंकि हम लोग परफेक्ट ट्रायंगल्स को एक्सपीरियंस नहीं करते हैं, बट वी एक्सपीरियंस पेन. So we do not experience objects, but we experience feelings and experience emotions. So our concept of the former is a more promising candidate for being innate, क्योंकि वो और ज़्यादा innate है because हम लोग उसको इतना ज़्यादा experience नहीं करते हैं. हम पेन को experience कर लेते हैं, so it is not that innate as compared to the concept of triangles. Now let us continue with rationalism. तो जो हमारी इंट्यूशन या डिडक्शन थीसिस है, जो इनेट नॉलेज थीसिस है और जो इनेट कॉन्सेप्ट थीसिस, ये तीनों जो अभी हमने डिस्कस करी है, ये तीनों इसेंशियल है टू रैशनलिज्म. Since the intuition deduction thesis is equally important to empiricism, the focus in what follows will be on the other two theses. तो intuition deduction thesis जो है वो empiricism और rationalism दोनों ही accept करते हैं, इसीलिए बाकी दो thesis जो rationalism की तरफ जिनका झुकाव हमें ज़्यादा दिखता है, so वो ज़्यादा दोनों thesis हम कह सकते हैं rationalism के ज़्यादा पास में हैं. Rationalists vary the strength of their view by adjusting their understanding of warrant. Warrant यानी वो additional component जो किसी भी guess को, किसी भी just a piece of information को knowledge या truth बनाता है. Some take voluntary beliefs to be beyond even the slightest doubt and claim that intuition provide beliefs of this high epistemic status. Rationalists vary the strength of their view by adjusting their understanding of warrant. Some take warranted beliefs to be beyond even the slightest doubt and claim that intuition provide beliefs of this high epistemic status. Others interpret warrant more conservatively, say as belief beyond a reasonable doubt, and claim that intuition provide beliefs of that caliber. Still, another dimension of rationalism depends on how its proponents understand the connection between intuition on the one hand and truth on the other. So basically यही बात हो रही है कि rationalists जो है वो अपनी strength को adjust करते हैं. Strength मतलब उनके arguments कितने ज़्यादा strong है, कितने ज़्यादा they are, how much they are overpowering the other side's argument. तो वो लोग warrant की understanding के साथ, जैसे कि there is one side that believes, that take warranted beliefs to be beyond even the slightest doubt, that you cannot doubt the warrants. जो warrants है, you cannot doubt them. They are true. There is no chance of doubt in them. Okay, they are true. Okay, and that इंट्यूशन प्रोवाइड बिलीव्स ऑफ दिस हाई से. तो मतलब कि जो वारंट है इसके लिए जो भी पावर है या जिसका प्रूफ है वो कौन प्रोवाइड करता है? इंट्यूशन प्रोवाइड करती है. नाउ द अदर साइड दे इंटरप्रेट वारंट मोर कंजर्वेटिवली, से एज बिलीव बियॉन्ड अ रीजनेबल डाउट, एंड क्लेम दैट इंट्यूशन प्रोवाइड बिलीव्स ऑफ दैट कैलिबर. The other side see that intuition provides us that beliefs that in turn provide us the caliber, provide us the warrant. So another dimension depends on how its proponents understand the connection between intuition on the one hand and truth on the other. तो ये intuition, warrants, इन तीनों दोनों तीनों चीज़ों के बीच में ही हम लोग वो कर रहे हैं. Some take intuition to be infallible. For some की intuition जो है वो गलत हो ही नहीं सकता. It has to be true. Infallible means it cannot go wrong anywhere. Claiming that whatever we intuit must be true. Others allow for the possibility of false intuited propositions. Others do allow कि हमारे intuitions भी false हो सकते हैं. Two other closely related theses are generally adopted by rationalists, although one can certainly be a rationalist without adopting either of them. तो दो और थीसिस हैं. ज़रूरी नहीं है कि रैशनलिस्ट को वो थीसिस अडॉप्ट करना ही है, बट दीज टू आर ऑल्सो वेरी प्रोमिनेंट वंस. इट्स नॉट नेसेसरी ऑल्दो कि इन दोनों को अडॉप्ट करना है, ये तभी वो रैशनलिस्ट कहलाएगा. फर्स्ट इज द indispensability of reason thesis. The knowledge we gain in subject area S by intuition and deduction, as well as the ideas and instances of knowledge in S that are innate to us, could not have been gained by us through sense experience. तो पहला है द इंडिस्पेंसिबिलिटी ऑफ रीज़न, यानी कि जिस भी सब्जेक्ट के रिगार्डिंग हम लोग नॉलेज गेन करते हैं, वेदर इट इज़ बाय इंट्यूशन और बाय डिडक्शन, मतलब वेदर नहीं बाय इंट्यूशन एंड डिडक्शन, एज वेल एज द आइडियाज एंड इंस्टेंसेस ऑफ नॉलेज that are innate to us could not have been gained through sense experience. तो indispensability of reason का मतलब कि reason is inevitable, reason का होना ज़रूरी है, बिना उसके हम लोग knowledge gain नहीं कर पाएंगे. The superiority of reason thesis. Now this says that the knowledge that we have gained innately or by intuition, ठीक है. देखिए ये जो दोनों थीसिस है, ये पहले के जो तीन थीसिस हमने डिस्कस करे हैं, दैट इज़ द इंट्यूशन थीसिस, द इनेट नॉलेज थीसिस एंड द इनेट कॉन्सेप्ट थीसिस. ओके, उनसे ये वो ले रहा है. तो पहले वाले में बोलता है कि जो इंडिस्पेंसिबिलिटी ऑफ रीज़न थीसिस है, उसमें इनेट वाली और इंट्यूशन वाली जो थीसिस है, that is inevitable, that has to be there. सेकेंड वाले में that जो नॉलेज हम लोग सेंस एक्सपीरियंस से गेन कर रहे हैं, मतलब हम सेंस एक्सपीरियंस से जो कुछ थोड़ी नॉलेज गेन कर रहे हैं, लेकिन जो कर रहे हैं वो इनेट और इंट्यूशन वाली नॉलेज से नीचे है. सो रीज़न इज सुपीरियर, नीड्स एक्सप्लेनेशन एंड रैशनलिस्ट ऑफ ऑफर डिफरेंट अकाउंट्स. तो कैसे रीज़न सुपीरियर है कि जो नॉलेज हम लोग थ्रू इंट्यूशन एंड इनेट एंड रीज़न के थ्रू गेन कर रहे हैं, हाउ इज़ दैट सुपीरियर दैन दिस सेंस एक्सपीरियंस? इसके डिफरेंट अकाउंट्स हैं. One is associated with Descartes, is that what we know by intuition is certain beyond even the slightest doubt, while what we believe or even know on the basis of sense experience is at least somewhat uncertain. तो Descartes का कहना है कि जो भी हम लोग सेंस एक्सपीरियंस से जानते हैं वो अनसर्टन है. इट्स नॉट नेसेसरी कि वो सच है ये, बट वॉट वी नो थ्रू इंट्यूशन इज़ कम्प्लीटली ट्रू. अनदर व्यू इज़ एसोसिएटेड विद प्लेटो, जो कि अगेन rationalist है. Locates the superiority of a priori knowledge in the objects known. What we know by reason alone, a Platonic form, say, is superior in an important metaphysical way. Example, unchanging, eternal, perfect, a higher degree of being to what we are aware of through sense experience. तो जैसे कि ए प्रायोरी का मतलब समझ ही चुके होंगे, हमने ये पहले भी डिस्कस किया कि कांट जो है वो जैसे टाइम को भी ही सेज दैट टाइम इज़ समथिंग एम्पिरिसिस्ट, इट्स नॉट ए प्रायोरी. ए प्रायोरी मीन समथिंग दैट वी गेन थ्रू रीजन एंड एम्पिरिसिस्ट मीन समथिंग दैट वी गेन थ्रू आवर एक्सपीरियंस, आवर सेंसेस. सो प्लेटो एंड डिस्कार्ट्स का कहना है, जैसे डिस्कार्ट्स का कहना है कि जो हम लोग सेंस एक्सपीरियंस से नॉलेज गेन करते हैं दैट इज़ अनसर्टन, एंड प्लेटो का कहना है कि व्हाट वी नो बाय रीजन अलोन इज सुपीरियर इन इम्पॉर्टेंट वे. इट इज़ अनचेंजिंग, इट इज़ एटर्नल, इट इज़ परफेक्ट एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट as compared to what we know through sense experience. Now, most forms of rationalism involve notable commitments to other philosophical positions. One is a commitment to the denial of skepticism or at least some area of knowledge. If we claim to know some truths by intuition or deduction or to have some innate knowledge, we obviously reject skepticism with regard to those truths. तो अगर हम लोग कह रहे हैं कि we know something through intuition या फिर we have some innate knowledge, that means There is no skepticism, there is no doubt in those truths. Rationalism, in the form of the intuition deduction thesis, is also committed to epistemic foundationalism, the view that we know some truths without basing our belief in them on any others, and that we then use this foundational knowledge to know more truths. ये जो foundational innate knowledge है, it is with the help of this we base them, and upon them we build our knowledge. Now let's talk about empiricism. Empiricism also endorses the intuition deduction thesis, but in a more restricted sense than the rationalist. तो हमने अभी देखिए हमने ये करा है कि हमने जो तीनों थीसिस पढ़े, अब वो तीनों जो थीसिस हैं, जैसे कि पहली थीसिस को रैशनिस्ट ने कैसे व्यू किया एंड एम्पिरिसिस्ट कैसे व्यू कर रहे हैं. Okay, so जो innate knowledge and intuition thesis है, that is more acceptable to the rationalist, whereas the innate concept thesis is more acceptable to the empiricist. This thesis applies only to relations of the contents of our mind, not also about empirical facts learned from the external world. By contrast, empiricists reject the innate knowledge and innate concept thesis. Insofar as we have knowledge in a subject, our knowledge is gained, not only triggered by our experiences, be they sensorial or reflective experiences, thus our only source of ideas. So according to empiricists, जो तीनों, जैसे कि हमने बात की कि तीनों thesis में they somewhere regard the intuition thesis, but they reject the innate knowledge and innate concept thesis. So that is what it is, कि according to them what intuition that we have is not complete knowledge, but just the relation to the contents of our mind and the external world, उनके बीच के relation. Okay, सो जितना हमें एक सब्जेक्ट के बारे में नॉलेज है, हमारी नॉलेज है वो कोई ट्रिगर नहीं होती है. एज द innate knowledge says, the innate knowledge thesis says that we already know, it's just that sense experience triggers them. That doesn't happen according to empiricists. Experience is thus our only source of ideas. Moreover, they reject the corresponding version of the superiority of reason thesis. So, of course, they will reject it. Since reason alone does not give us any knowledge, it certainly does not give us superior knowledge. Empiricists need not reject the indispensability of reason thesis, but most of them do. The main characteristics of empiricism, however, is that it endorses a version of the following claim for some subject area. जो empiricism thesis हम main जो वो क्या बात करते हैं? We have no source of knowledge in S, or for the concepts we use in S other than experience. To be clear, the empiricist thesis does not entail that we have empirical knowledge. It entails that knowledge can only be gained, if at all, by experience. तो बहुत क्लियर समझ में आ रहा है कि नॉलेज को गेन करने का the only way to gain knowledge is through experience. Empiricists may assert, as some do, for some subjects, that the rationalists are correct to claim that experience cannot give us knowledge. The conclusion they draw from this rationalist lesson is that we do not know at all. This is indeed Hume's position with regard to causation, which he argues is not actually known, but only presupposed to be holding true in virtue of a particular habit of our minds. Okay, so yes, as rationalists say that experience cannot give us knowledge, because empiricists कहते हैं because we do not know is lesson that we do not know at all. We don't know anything. Okay, जैसे कि डेविड ह्यूम जो है उसकी हमने वो करा है, मतलब डेविड ह्यूम का कहना है कि that regard to causation is not known but only presupposed to be holding true. So particular habits of our mind, मतलब it's just that it's the same thing that empiricists say that all the knowledge that we have gained is through experience. We have stated the basic claims of rationalism and empiricism so that each is relative to a particular subject area. Rationalism and empiricism, so relativized, need not conflict. We can be rationalist in mathematics or a particular area of mathematics and empiricist in all or some of the physical sciences. They only conflict when formulated to cover the same subject. ये बहुत ही एक इंटरेस्टिंग सा पॉइंट यहाँ पर है कि rationalism and empiricism are not the opposites of each other. You need not be into one category. You can be a rationalist in mathematics and empiricist in some areas of physical sciences. जैसे कि बहुत easily explain किया हुआ है कि हो सकता है कि आपको लगता है कि mathematics में जितनी भी चीज़ें we only gain through reason. We don't experience them. And physical sciences की जो चीज़ें we do it through experience and we don't gain that knowledge from reason. So you can be a rationalist in some areas, you can be an empiricist in some areas, and there's again a third category who are neither empiricist nor physicist, जो हम आगे पढ़ेंगे. Okay, so they only conflict when over the same subject. आप same subject के ऊपर जब बात करते हैं, that is when they conflict. The fact that philosophers can be both of them has implications for the classification schemes often employed in the history of philosophy, especially the one traditionally used to describe the early modern period of the 17th and 18th century leading up to Kant. It is standard practice to group the philosophers of this period as either rationalist or empiricist, and to suggest that those under one heading share a common agenda in opposition to those under other. Thus, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz are the continental rationalist in opposition to Locke, Hume, Reid, and British empiricist. Such general classification schemes should only be adopted with great caution, क्योंकि हम ये आगे देख चुके हैं कि they are not completely rationalists or not completely empiricists. Okay, the views of the individual philosopher are a lot more subtle and complex than the simple-minded classification suggests. उससे ज़्यादा कॉम्प्लेक्स है. हम लोग सिंपली बस उनको ग्रुप नहीं कर सकते, दे आर रैशनलिस्ट, दे आर एम्पिरिसिस्ट. उनके इन फिलोसोफर्स के व्यूज़ आर मोर कॉम्प्लेक्स. Locke rejects rationalism in the form of any version for the if the innate knowledge or innate concept thesis, but he nonetheless adopts the intuition deduction thesis with regard to a knowledge of God's existence, in addition to a knowledge of mathematics and morality. Descartes and Locke have remarkably similar views on the nature of our ideas, even though Descartes takes many to be innate, while Locke ties them all to experience. The rationalist empiricist classification also encourages us to expect the philosophers on each side of the divide to have common research programs in areas beyond epistemology. Thus, Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz are mistakenly seen as applying a reason-centered epistemology to a common metaphysical agenda, with each trying to improve on the efforts of the one before, while Locke, Hume, and Reid are mistakenly seen as gradually rejecting those metaphysical claims, with each consciously trying to improve on the efforts of his predecessors. It is also important to note that the rationalist-empiricist distinction is not exhaustive of the possible sources of knowledge. One might claim, अब ये चीज़ तो that is so clear, हमने जो अभी तक पढ़ा, but one more thing is we can gain knowledge by through a divine revelation. जैसे कि मैंने आपको कहा कि there is another thing that is not neither rationalist nor empiricist. So there is a third way of gaining knowledge, that is through divine things. Some people also say that we have gained it through the divine revelation or insight, that is a product of neither reason nor sense experience. So in short, ये पूरा यही समझा रहा है कि we cannot use rationalism and empiricism very carelessly. We have to be very cautious, because using them can confine some of the discussions. Okay, an important wrinkle for using this classification scheme in the history of philosophy is that it leaves out discussions of philosophical figures who did not focus their efforts on understanding whether innate knowledge is possible or even fruitful to have. Philosophy in the early modern period in particular is a lot richer than this artificial simplifying distinction makes it sound. There is no clear way of grouping Hobbes with either camp, let alone Elizabeth of Bohemia, Anne Conway, George Berkeley, Emile de Châtelet, or Mary Shefford. This distinction, initially applied by Kant, is responsible for giving us a very restrictive philosophical canon which does not take into account developments in the philosophy of emotions, philosophy of education, and even disputes in areas of philosophy considered more mainstream like ethics and aesthetics. So basically, it's the same thing that we cannot just simply classify them like Hobbes and Elizabeth of Bohemia, Emily de Châtelet. We cannot really group them into being rationalist or empiricists. It was only by Kant mainly that this distinction was given and carried. Unless restricted to debates regarding the possibility of innate knowledge, this distinction is best left unused. The most interesting form of the debate occurs when we take the relevant subject to be truths about the external world, the world beyond our minds. A full-fledged rationalist with regard to a knowledge of the external world holds that some external world truths are and must be innate, and this knowledge is superior to any that sense experience could ever provide. तो फुल फ्लेजेड रैशनलिस्ट यही बोलेगा कि जो हमारी इनेट नॉलेज है वो ज़्यादा सुपीरियर है कोई भी सेंस एक्सपीरियंस वाले नॉलेज से. The full-fledged empiricist about our knowledge of the external world replies that when it comes to the nature of the world beyond our minds, experience is our sole source of information. Reason might inform us of the relations among our ideas, but those ideas themselves can only be gained, and any truth about the external reality they represent can only be known on the basis of experience. So again, that same thing is happening, experience versus reason. Okay. Historically, rationalist empiricist debut in epistemology has extended into the area of metaphysics, where philosophers are concerned with the basic nature of reality. तो ये जो dispute है, ये धीरे धीरे करके epistemology से आगे बढ़ के metaphysics में भी include हो गया है, जहाँ पर हम लोग nature of reality वगैरह को भी concern करने लगे, the existence of God and nature as free will and all of these things. Okay, so some rationalists have presented metaphysical theories only to be known by intuition. Empiricists have rejected and said that they are known from experience and all of that thing. So the debate raises the issue of metaphysics as an area of knowledge. Kant puts the driving assumption clearly. The very concept of metaphysics ensures that the sources of metaphysics can't be empirical. If something could be known through the senses, that would automatically show that it doesn't belong to metaphysics. Okay, तो Kant का एक बात ये कहना है that the concept of metaphysics ensures that the sources of metaphysics can't be empirical. कि metaphysics in खुद में जो कॉन्सेप्ट है वो यही बोलता है कि हम मेटाफिजिक्स को थ्रू सेंस एक्सपीरियंस नहीं पता कर सकते हैं. अगर कोई भी चीज़ हम सेंसेस के थ्रू पता कर रहे हैं, दैट मीन्स इट डजंट बिलोंग टू मेटाफिजिक्स. दैट्स एन अपशॉट ऑफ द मीनिंग ऑफ द वर्ड मेटाफिजिक्स. Its basic principles can never be taken from experience, nor can its basic concepts, for it is not to be physical but metaphysical knowledge. So it must be beyond experience. क्योंकि ये फिजिकल नहीं, मेटाफिजिकल नॉलेज है, इसलिए हम उसको थ्रू एक्सपीरियंस गेन नहीं कर सकते. बिकॉज मेटाफिजिक्स इज समथिंग अबाउट द नेचर ऑफ बीइंग, द एग्जिस्टेंस, द नेचर, द यूनिवर्स. तो इन चीज़ों को हम लोग अगर बोलते हैं कि इफ़ दिस इज़ गेन्ड थ्रू एक्सपीरियंस एंड वी आर गोइंग अगेंस्ट द वेरी कॉन्सेप्ट, द वेरी आइडिया ऑफ मेटाफिजिक्स. The possibility then of metaphysics, so understood as an area of human knowledge, hinges on how we resolve the rationalist empiricist debate. The debate also extends into ethics. So ये debate जो है, मतलब ये epistemology से आगे बढ़कर it has also gone into the areas of ethics and metaphysics. Some moral objectivists take us to know some fundamental objective moral truths by intuition, while some moral skeptics who reject this knowledge find the appeal to faculty of moral intuition utterly implausible. So they have also extended to of the very nature of philosophical inquiry, to what extent are philosophical questions to be answered by appeals to reason or experience. So that is the basic thing that we discussed. मतलब आगे the previous paragraph, they're only trying to explain that कैसे जो epistemological debate है of rationalism and empiricism, ये has gone into the different areas of philosophy as well. The intuition deduction thesis claims that we know some propositions by intuition and still more by deduction. So intuition deduction thesis को basically हम लोग करेंगे, and it's a very simple thesis, मतलब बहुत ही simple ideas वो कर रहा है. Traditionally, this thesis was thought to be rejected by empiricists and adopted only by rationalists. It is useful to become more familiar with it. In a very narrow sense, only rationalists seem to adopt it. However, the current consensus is that most empiricists, Locke, Hume, Reid, have been willing to accept a version of the thesis, namely in as much as it is restricted to propositions solely about the relations among our own concepts. तो पहले ऐसा ही होता था कि only rationalists have believed in that thesis, but other empiricists also in some restrictions believed this thesis or were willing to believe them. They agree, know by intuition that our concept of God includes our concept of omniscience. Okay. They agree, know by intuition that our concept of God includes our concept of omniscience. Just by examining the concepts, we can intellectually grasp that the one includes the other. कि our concept of God includes our concept of omniscience. Omniscience, मतलब the debate between rationalists and empiricists is joined when the former assert and the latter deny the intuition deduction thesis with regard to propositions that contain substantive information about the external world. Rationalists such as Descartes have claimed that we can know by intuition and deduction that God exists and created the world, that our mind and body are distinct substances, and that the angles of a triangle equal two right angles, where all of these claims are truths about an external reality independent of our thought. Such substantive versions of the intuition deduction thesis are our concern in this section. कि substantive versions, some of the versions, जैसे कि one defense कि it's very simple that rationalists have claimed that we know through intuition that the God exists. Our mind and body are two different things, that we know this through intuition. One defense of the intuition deduction thesis assumes that we know some substantive external world truths as is of what knowledge requires, and concludes that our knowledge must result from intuition and deduction. Rationalists and empiricists alike claim that certainty is required for scientia, which is a type of absolute knowledge of the necessary connections that would explain why certain things are in its way, and that certainty about the external world is beyond what empirical evidence can provide. Empiricists seem happy to then conclude that the type of knowledge of the external world that we can acquire does not have this high degree of certainty and is thus not scientia. तो आफ्टर दिस इंट्यूशन डिडक्शन थीसिस का एक डिफेंस ये भी है कि द एम्पिरिसिस्ट हैव क्लेम्ड that we cannot be so sure of the knowledge that we have gained through external world as we can be sure through intuition. ठीक है, this is because we can never be sure our sensory impressions are not part of a dream or a massive demon orchestrated deception. A rationalist like Descartes of the Meditations claims that only intuition can provide the certainty needed for such knowledge. This, after his arguing in the rules that when we review all the actions of the intellect by means of which we are able to arrive at a knowledge of things with no fear of being mistaken, we recognize only two: intuition and deduction. मतलब कि whatever knowledge that we have is gained through intuition and deduction, that we know some things to be intuitively true, we know it by intuition that it is true, and then we deduce certain things. We say that okay, through intuition we know some of these things, and we build premises and propositions on it, and then we derive conclusions from it. This line of argument is one of the least compelling in the rationalist arsenal. First, the assumption that knowledge requires certainty comes at a heavy cost. So, first, the assumption that knowledge requires certainty comes at a heavy cost, as it rules out so much of what we commonly take ourselves to know. Second, as many contemporary rationalists accept, intuition is not always a source of certain knowledge. The possibility of a deceiver gives us a reason to doubt our intuitions as well as our empirical beliefs. For all we know, a deceiver might cause us to intuit false propositions, just as one might cause us to have perceptions of non-existent objects. ओके, सो अब हम लोग देखेंगे कि वन ऑफ द लीस्ट कंपेलिंग इन द रैशनलिस्ट आर्सेनल, मतलब कि रैशनलिस्ट जिस इंट्यूशन डिडक्शन थीसिस को बिलीव करते हैं उसके कुछ काउंटर आर्ग्यूमेंट्स भी. अभी हमने देखा कि हाउ दे सपोर्ट द रैशनलिस्ट थिंकिंग. First is that knowledge requires certainty comes at a heavy cost, that it rules out so much of what we commonly take ourselves to know. कि knowledge को सच होना ही ज़रूरी है. We know so many things about so many things, that doesn't mean that all of it is true. Secondly, many contemporary rationalists accept that intuition is not always a source of certain knowledge. कि ज़रूरी नहीं है कि हर knowledge का source, एक certain knowledge का source intuition ही हो. ठीक है, it may be that sometimes some other people give us something and we believe it to be intuition. Okay, for all we know, okay, so it may happen कि कई बार हमारे they can put ideas and beliefs in our head and we think it them to be intuitions. Descartes' classic way of meeting this challenge in the Meditations is to argue that we can know with certainty that no such deceiver interferes with our intuitions and deductions. They are infallible, as God guarantees their truth. The problem known as the Cartesian circle is that Descartes' account of how we gain this knowledge begs the question by attempting to deduce the conclusion that all our intuitions are true from intuited premises. Moreover, his account does not touch a remaining problem that he himself notes. Deductions of any appreciable length rely only on our fallible memory. सो एक चीज़ जो डिस्कार्ट्स खुद नोट करता है, एंड द प्रॉब्लम दैट कैन नॉट बी दैट हैजंट बीन आंसर्ड अंटिल इज़ दैट कि कोई भी टाइप का डिडक्शन जो है वो हमारी फैलिएबल मेमोरी के ऊपर डिपेंड करता है. मेमोरी दैट कैन बी मिस्टेकन, मेमोरी दैट मे नॉट बी ट्रू. ओके, सो जो हम लोग कंक्लूजन्स डिराइव करते हैं वो कई बार ऐसी मेमोरी के ऊपर बेस होते हैं जो मेमोरी गलत हो सकती है. A more plausible argument for the intuition deduction thesis again assumes that we know some particular external world truths and then appeals to the nature of what we know. rather than to the nature of knowledge itself, to argue that our knowledge must result from intuition and deduction. Okay, Leibniz in News tells us the following. कैसे देखिए, the senses, although they are necessary for oral actual knowledge, are not sufficient to give us the whole of it. So Leibniz says that our senses are not sufficient, since the senses never give anything but instances, that is to say particular or individual truths. तो हमारे senses हमें individual truths देते हैं. Now all the instances which confirm a general truth, however numerous they may be, are not sufficient to establish the universal necessity of the same truth. For it does not follow that what happened before will happen in the same way again. From which it appears that necessary truths, such as we find in pure mathematics, and particularly in arithmetic and geometry, must have principles whose proof does not depend on instances, nor consequently on the testimony of the senses, although without senses it would never have occurred to us to think of them. So Leibniz का कहना है कि it is through senses that हम उनके बारे में सोचते हैं, but whatever we know about senses can be an individual truth, not the universal truth. बहुत ही कॉमन सा एक हम एग्जाम्पल यहाँ पे ले सकते हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अ पर्सन इज सफरिंग फ्रॉम जॉन्डिस. अब जॉन्डिस इज़ अ कंडीशन वेर आर विजन बिकम्स येलोइश. ओके, हमारा विजन पेल आउट हो जाता है, एंड वॉट एवर वी सी सीम्स टू अस येलोइश. इफ यू लुक एट अ वाइट वॉल, इफ अ पर्सन सफरिंग from jaundice looks at the white wall, he or she will think that it is a yellow wall. Okay, now through our sense the person has gained that there is a yellow wall in front of him. So that is an individual truth. But what is the universal truth? The universal truth is that it is a white wall. So that is what Leibniz is trying to explain, that senses के through हमें individual truths मिल सकते हैं but not universal truths. Leibniz goes on to describe our mathematical knowledge as innate, and his argument is more commonly directed to support the innate knowledge thesis rather than the intuition deduction thesis. So Leibniz जो है वो ज़्यादातर innate knowledge के ऊपर ज़्यादा focus करता है. Our purpose is here, we can relate it to the latter. However, we have substantive knowledge about the external world in mathematics, and what we know in that area we know to be necessarily true. Experience cannot warrant beliefs about what is necessarily the case. Hence experience cannot be the source of our knowledge, क्योंकि जो चीज़ हमें like whatever we know about mathematics is through reason. Okay, and that is certainly true, that is necessarily true. So experience cannot warrant and guarantee our beliefs to be true. Hence, experience cannot be the source of our knowledge. The best explanation of our knowledge is that we gain it by intuition and deduction. Leibniz mentions logic, metaphysics, morals, where knowledge similarly outstrips what experience can provide. Judgments in logic and metaphysics involve forms of necessity beyond what experience can support. Judgments in morals involve a form of obligation or value that lies beyond experience, which only informs us about what is the case rather than about what ought to be. The strength of this argument varies with its examples of purported knowledge, insofar as we focus on the controversial claims in metaphysics that God exists, that our mind is a distinct substance from our body. The initial premise that we know the claims is less than compelling. Taken with regard to other areas, however, the argument clearly has legs. We know a great deal of mathematics, and what we know to be necessarily true. None of our experiences warrants a belief in such necessity, and we do not seem to base our knowledge in any experience. ओके, तो ये जो आर्ग्यूमेंट दिया है ओके लेबनीज़ ने, तो that argument is strengthened with examples of purported knowledge. That means that whatever we know about anything is through reason, and reason के through जो हमें पता चलता है it is necessarily true. But what we know through experiences may not be necessarily true. It can be very much false. Okay. Similarly, we seem to have such moral knowledge as that all other things being equal, it is wrong to break a promise, and that pleasure is intrinsically good. No empirical lesson about how things can warrant such knowledge of how they ought to be. This argument for the intuition deduction thesis raises additional questions which rationalists must answer. तो एक question arises के बाद होता है. They maintain that our knowledge of necessary truths in mathematics or elsewhere by intuition and deduction is substantive knowledge of the external world. They owe us an account of this form of necessity. That you are saying that whatever knowledge we know through intuition is certain, बिल्कुल correct है. Then what is the proof that the account of that necessity? How can we say that it is completely true? Many empiricists stand ready to argue that necessity resides in the way we talk about things, not in the things we talk about. तो जिस तरीके से हम चीज़ों के बारे में बात करते हैं, दैट इज़ वेयर द नेसेसिटी लाइज एंड नॉट इन द थिंग्स. Similarly, if rationalists claim that our knowledge in morals is no knowledge of an objective form of obligation, they was an account of how objective values are part of a world apparently valueless facts. तो अगर रैशनलिस्ट का कहना है कि जो भी मॉरल के बारे में हमारे नॉलेज है, दैट मॉरल्स हैव टू बी ऑब्जेक्टिव इन नेचर. ऑब्जेक्टिव मतलब रिगार्डलेस ऑफ दी सर्कमस्टांसेस, रिगार्डलेस ऑफ एनीथिंग. इफ समथिंग इज करेक्ट देन इट इज़ करेक्ट. इफ समथिंग इज एथिकली राइट इट इज़ एथिकली राइट. Then how come there are, how objective values are part of a world of apparently valueless facts? That how the facts don't have any value component in them. Most of all, any defenders of the intuition deduction thesis owe us an account of what intuition is and how it provides warranted true beliefs about the external world. कि you say कि सबसे पहले intuition है क्या? What do you say about what is this that we know it by intuition? So what is this intuition, and how can you say that whatever we know through intuition is absolutely correct? What is it to intuit a proposition? How does that act of intuition support a warranted belief? Their argument presents intuition and deduction as an explanation of assumed knowledge that can't, they say, be explained by experience. But such an explanation by intuition and deduction requires that we have a clear understanding of intuition and how it supports warranted beliefs. Metaphorical characterizations of intuition as intellectual grasping or seeing are not enough. And if intuition is some form of intellectual grasping, it appears that all that is grasped is relations among our concepts rather than facts about the external world, as the empiricist defenders of intuition and deduction argue. One current approach to the issue involves an appeal to phenomenal conservatism. अब ये क्या है? The principle that if it seems to be to one as if something is the case, then one is prima facie justified in believing that it is so. तो phenomenal conservatism का मतलब होता है कि अगर किसी को लगता है कि something is the case, then that is the case for that person. जैसे कि हमने अभी jaundice वाले का example लिया था कि if for the person suffering through jaundice the wall is yellow, then the wall is yellow for that person, and that is the truth. And that is actually the truth, because for that person the wall is yellow. Intuitions are then taken to be a particular sort of seeming or appearance. An intuition that is a state of its seeming to one that P is not dependent on inferences from the beliefs, and that results from thinking about P as opposed to perceiving, remembering, or introspecting. Just as it can visually seem or appear to one as if there is a tree outside the window, it can intellectually seem or appear to one as if nothing can be both entirely red and entirely green. This approach aims to demystify intuitions. They are but one more form of seeming state along with ones we gain from sense experience, memory and introspection. सो बेसिकली बात ये हो रही कि अगर हमारा इंट्यूशन कोई चीज़, हमारा इंट्यूशन ये भी कह सकता है कि कोई भी चीज़ पूरी तरीके से ग्रीन नहीं हो सकती. देयर आर स्प्लैशेस ऑफ अदर कलर्स इन इट, बट दैट मे नॉट बी नेसेसरीली ट्रू. So what we know through intuition may also be false sometimes. They can also be an intellectual faculty, whether it be sense perception, memory, introspection. Intuition provides us with warranted beliefs only if it is generally reliable. कि generally reliable मतलब more than one person thinks of it. Only then can we say. The reliability of sense perception stems from the causal connection between how external objects are and how we experience them. So what accounts for the reliability of our intuitions regarding the external world? Is our intuition of a particular true proposition that the outcome of some causal interaction? So these are some questions that are being asked about the intuition deduction thesis. What are intuitions? How much are they reliable in regarding the external world? How much are the propositions that we gain through intuition true? What is the nature of this causal interaction? All of these things. That the number 3 is prime does not appear to cause anything, let alone our intuition that it is prime. As Michael Hume points that out in mounting his own defense of moral intuitionism, the challenge for the moral realist then is to explain how it would be anything more than chance if moral beliefs were true, given that I do not interact with moral properties. So how do you say that moral beliefs, moral intuitions are true if that person doesn't even deal with those moral properties, if the person doesn't even, use them anywhere? These issues are made all the more pressing by the classic empiricist response to the argument. The reply is generally credited to Hume and begins with a division of all true propositions into two categories. तो अब Hume जो है, डेविड ह्यूम जो है, वो जितने भी propositions है, true propositions की बात कर रहे हैं, उनको दो categories में divide करता है. All the objects of human reason or inquiry may naturally be divided into two kinds, to wit, relations of ideas and matters of fact. Of the first are the sciences of geometry, algebra, arithmetic, every observation which is either intuitively or demonstratively certain. या तो वो चीज़ इंट्यूटिवली ट्रू है या वो डेमोन्स्ट्रेटिवली, मतलब हम उसको डेमोन्स्ट्रेट करके शो कर सकते हैं कि दैट इज़ ट्रू. जैसे कि ज्योमेट्री, algebra, arithmetic, these are the relations of ideas. That the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the square of the two sides is a proposition which expresses a relation between these figures. तो relation दो फिगर्स के बीच में रिलेशन बताता है और हम उसको डेमोन्स्ट्रेट करके ट्रू शो कर सकते हैं. 3 times 5 is equal to half of 30. ये दो नंबर्स के बीच में रिलेशन बताता है. Propositions of this kind are discoverable by the mere operation of thought, कि सिर्फ उसके बारे में सोच के हम उसको डिस्कवर कर सकते हैं. Because we think of it, then we test it and it becomes, मतलब वो फिर सही गलत निकल जाता है. By demonstration we can prove that they are true without dependence on what is anywhere existent in the universe. Though there never were a circle or triangle in nature, the truths demonstrated by Euclid would forever retain their certainty and evidence. Matters of fact, which are the second objects of human reason. अब पहला ऑब्जेक्ट हमने रिलेशन वाला देख लिया कि रिलेशंस ऑफ आइडियाज़, क्योंकि हम दो चीज़ों के बीच में रिलेशन देख रहे हैं. हम देख रहे हैं कि दे कैन बी डेमोन्स्ट्रेटेड एंड प्रूव ट्रू, जो इंट्यूटिवली हो सकते हैं. द सेकेंड इज द मैटर्स ऑफ फैक्ट. ठीक है, these are not ascertained in the same manner, nor is there evidence of their truth, however great, of a like nature with the foregoing. The contrary of every matter of fact is still possible, because it can never imply a contradiction and is conceived by the mind with the same facility and distinctness as if ever so conformable to reality. The matters of fact जो हो सकते हैं वो at any point of time जितने सही है वो दूसरे point of time में उतने ही गलत हो सकते हैं. Okay, so and their evidence of truth is also not very foregoing or not very मतलब in that sense. And the contrary of it is possible, जैसे कि जो relations of ideas है उसका contrary possible नहीं है. Okay, 3 times 5 will always be equal to 15, उसका contrary possible नहीं है. But in matters of fact the contrary is very much possible, कि उसका opposite is possible. Intuition and deduction can provide us with knowledge of necessary truths such as those found in mathematics and logic, but such knowledge is not substantive knowledge of the external world. It is only knowledge of the relations of our own ideas. If the rationalist shifts the arguments so it appeals to knowledge in morals, Hume's replies to offer an analysis of our moral concepts by which such knowledge is empirical gained knowledge of matters of fact. तो इंट्यूशन और डिडक्शन जो है वो कुछ नेसेसरी इंपॉर्टेंट चीज़ों के बारे में, जैसे मैथमेटिक्स और लॉजिक में जो हमें ट्रूथ मिलते हैं उनके बारे में ट्रूथ हमें दे सकता है. लेकिन ये नॉलेज जो है इज़ नॉट सब्सटैंटिव नॉलेज ऑफ द एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड. इट इज़ द नॉलेज ऑफ द रिलेशंस ऑफ आवर ओन आइडियाज़. हमारे खुद के आइडियाज़ के बीच का रिलेशन है ये. हमें ये एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड के बारे में उतने नहीं है. अगर रैशनलिस्ट जो है ये अपना आर्ग्यूमेंट शिफ्ट कर देते हैं, so it appeals to knowledge in morals. Hume's reply is to offer an analysis of our moral concepts by which such knowledge is empirically gained knowledge of matters of fact. Morals and criticism are not so properly objects of the understanding as of taste and sentiment. Beauty, whether moral or natural, is felt more properly than perceived. Or if we reason concerning it, that an endeavor to fix the standard, we regard a new fact, to wit, the general taste of mankind, or some other fact which may be the object of reasoning and inquiry. So जैसे कि beauty, it is more properly felt, is felt more properly than perceived. तो उसको experience से ज़्यादा हम उसको ज़्यादा feel करते हैं. मतलब if the rationalist appeals to our knowledge in metaphysics to support the argument, Hume denies that we have such knowledge. Hume deny कर देगा कि we don't have any such knowledge as gained through the rationalistic thinking in regard to metaphysics. If we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics, for instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity or number? No. ठीक है, अगर डिविनिटी और स्कूल मेटाफिजिक्स की बात कर रहे हैं, सो एनी एब्स्ट्रैक्ट रीजनिंग कंसिडरिंग क्वांटिटी और नंबर? नो, इट डजंट. कोई नंबर वगैरह से लेकर कोई रिलेशन में नहीं आता है. डज इट कंटेन एनी एक्सपेरिमेंटल रीजनिंग कंसर्निंग मैटर ऑफ फैक्ट एंड एग्जिस्टेंस? नो. Commit it then to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. So about divinity, nothing can be certain about the existence, number, anything. An updated version of this general empiricist reply, with an increased emphasis on language and the nature of meaning, is given in the 20th century by AIR's version of logical positivism. Adopting positivism's verification theory of meaning, IR assigns every cognitively meaningful sentence to one of two categories. Either it is a tautology, and so true solely by virtue of the meaning of its terms and provides no substantive information about the world, कि वो सिर्फ जो बोलता है उसके लिए ट्रू है, मतलब वो एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड के बारे में कोई हमें पर्टिकुलर नॉलेज नहीं देता है, दैट इज टोटोलॉजी. और इट इज़ ओपन टू एम्पिरिकल वेरिफिकेशन. देयर इज देन नो रूम फॉर नॉलेज अबाउट द एक्सटर्नल वर्ल्ड बाय इंट्यूशन और डिडक्शन. तो इंट्यूशन और डिडक्शन की कोई जगह ही नहीं है. या तो वो जो बोला गया है वो उसके मीनिंग ऑफ इट्स ओन टर्म्स प्रोवाइड नो सब्सटेंटिव इन्फॉर्मेशन अबाउट द वर्ल्ड, बट ट्रू सोनली बाय वर्च्यू, कि मतलब ऑफ इट्स टर्म्स, मतलब कि वो not providing much information about the external world. Or the second category is through empirical verification, कि whatever is known or made known to us, we verify it through our senses. तो यहाँ पर intuition deduction का कोई वो ही नहीं आया. whatever is मतलब कि जो भी किसी चीज़ के बारे में बोला गया है, that word justifies the correct meaning of it. So there is no point of virtue here. There can be no a priori knowledge of reality. ओके, सो ए प्रायरी मीन्स थ्रू रीज़न. तो रियलिटी का कोई ए प्रायरी यानी रैशनलिस्टिक नॉलेज नहीं हो सकता है. द ट्रूथ्स ऑफ प्योर रीज़न, द प्रोपोजिशंस विच वी नो टू बी वैलिड इंडिपेंडेंटली ऑफ ऑल एक्सपीरियंस, आर सो ओनली इन वर्च्यू ऑफ देयर लैक ऑफ फैक्चुअल कंटेंट. तो जो भी चीज़ें हमें एक्सपीरियंस से पता चलती है वो इसीलिए होती है कि दे लैक फैक्चुअल कंटेंट. फैक्ट्स उसमें कम होते हैं, फैक्चुअल कंटेंट, क्योंकि वी नो इट थ्रू आर एक्सपीरियंस. Empirical propositions are one and all hypotheses which may be confirmed or discredited in actual sense experience. The rationalists' argument for the intuition deduction thesis goes wrong at the start by assuming that we can have substantive knowledge of the external world that outstrips what experience can warrant. We cannot, कि जो भी हमें substantive knowledge है external world के बारे में, we can have that outside what experience can warrant. हम लोग नहीं कर सकते कि जो मतलब एम्पेरिसिस्ट का कहना है कि जो एक्सपीरियंस है वो हमें वेरीफाइड नॉलेज देता है और वो जो है वो गेस को ट्रूथ में या नॉलेज में कन्वर्ट करता है, बिकॉज वी आर एक्सपीरियंसिंग इट, वी आर सेंसिंग इट, परसीविंग इट थ्रू आवर ओन सेंसेस. तो एम्पेरिसिस्ट का कहना है कि बहुत बिल्कुल शुरू से ही रैशनलिस्ट इस चीज़ में गलत है. This empiricist reply faces challenges of its own. Our knowledge of mathematics seem to be about something more than our own concept. तो empiricist अगर कहते हैं कि हम उसको experience कर रहे हैं, हमें उसके बारे में पता है and all of that, लेकिन जो mathematics के बारे में हमें पता है वो हमारे खुद के concept नहीं लग रहे हैं. Our knowledge of moral judgments. The general principles that provide a basis for the empiricist view, example Hume's overall account of our ideas, a verification principle of meaning, are problematic in their own right. In all, rationalists have an argument for the intuition thesis relative to a substantive knowledge of the external world, but its success rests on how well they can answer questions about the nature and epistemic force of intuition. So basically, intuition deduction thesis के बारे में rationalists जो कह रहे हैं उसके बारे में कुछ problems है कि अगर rationalist जो है, देखिए empiricist intuition deduction thesis को बहुत ही restricted way में वो कर रहे हैं, एक्सेप्ट कर रहे हैं, बट रैशनलिस्ट उसको कम्प्लीटली एक्सेप्ट कर रहे हैं. तो यहाँ पे रैशनलिस्ट के लिए कुछ क्वेश्चंस आ जाते हैं कि आप जिस इंट्यूशन की बात करें, व्हाट इज़ दिस इंट्यूशन, एक्सप्लेन व्हाट डू यू मीन बाय दिस इंट्यूशन, एंड देन हाउ कैन यू बी सो श्योर कि जो भी चीज़ हमें इंट्यूशन से मिल रही है इट इज़ कम्प्लीटली ट्रू. क्योंकि अगर हम देखें जो हमें सेंस एक्सपीरियंसेस से जो हम नॉलेज गेन कर रहे हैं, इट इज़ मोर वेरीफाइड as compared to the intuition, and thus intuitions can be false. कई बार हमारे मन में ideas put किए जा सकते हैं which we may think of them to be intuitions but they are not actually intuitions. वो सिर्फ externally हमारे mind में put किए जा रहे हैं, they are not actually intuitions. So there are certain questions that again rationalists need to answer when they are pressing on the intuition deduction thesis.